If you read the news or watch any informational YouTube channel on this platform for long enough, you will have likely seen something that's talked about. Is the People's Republic of China about to invade the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan? But while this theoretical topic has been highly discussed both on this platform and in the broader media, let's take a bit of a closer look and ask, is China ever going to invade Taiwan? While Chinese leaders, diplomats, and military personnel love doing displays that grab headlines, such as saying that Taiwan is playing with fire, or sending a bunch of military planes into their airspace, the reality is that China wants to avoid military conflict. The island has received some military guarantees from Japan and the United States, so an invasion could be pitting the world's second largest economy against the world's first and third largest economies. Speaking of economy, an invasion would likely be a disaster for China's own, due to the country's heavy reliance on trading partners, many of those being democracies in the Western sphere of influence. So any Russian-style sanctions from the Chinese, say from NATO and its allies, could do some serious damage. To give you some numbers, out of China's top 20 largest trading partners in 2022, 11 of them have sanctioned Russia. But just as the invasion of Ukraine has created crises for countries who are recipients of Ukraine's exports, an invasion of Taiwan would be chaotic for the global economy, as the single island of Taiwan is responsible for 90% of the world's semiconductor output. Technology that is used in pretty much all other technology. Not to mention that China itself is responsible for 15% of the world's total goods. So sanctions on that would not just hurt China, but all of the countries putting those sanctions on. And what Chinese leader Xi Jinping does not want, amidst a gloomy economic outlook and a potential real estate crisis, is a stalled-out Ukraine-like war draining the state's resources. Especially one being fought by an army that hasn't actually seen combat in over 40 years. So, instead of a military invasion, Xi Jinping prefers non-military means of annexing Taiwan. That is to say, reunification is a top priority, but ideally not achieved through an amphibious assault. Sadly for mainland China, Taiwan has never been less interested in joining the motherland. According to polling, only 5% of Taiwan citizens identify solely as Chinese. Meanwhile, 60% and growing identify as solely Taiwanese. Polling has also shown that voters overwhelmingly reject unification with the mainland. This as China is encroaching on democratic Hong Kong, further strengthening separatist sentiment in the progressive democracy of Taiwan. Okay, but what if China invaded anyway? Well, let's look at the scenario by first looking at the invasion in Ukraine. I know you're focusing on Taiwan, but they do have similar backgrounds. Both countries have a large, unfriendly, imperialist, autocratic neighbor on its doorstep. And those two autocratic countries' leaders are best friends. Remember when Ukraine was just being invaded? The world thought that the Russians were gonna blow through the Ukrainian defenses and walk right into the capital. But, to the world's surprise, that didn't happen, and the war is actually still going on today. Even though Russia is a much bigger country with a much bigger military, they're unable to defeat Ukraine. And more so, they showed that the West can have a striking amount of unity. This leads to our next point, that invading Taiwan is gonna be a fair bit harder than invading the rolling hills and flat farmlands of Ukraine. Taiwan's geography. something China cannot control, is not ideal for an invading army. The Taiwanese Strait, which separates the main island from the Chinese mainland, is over 100 kilometers or 60 miles long at its narrowest point, and is dotted with over 100 small and heavily armed islands under Taiwan's control. If China's People's Liberation Army is able to get through the strait without being completely bombarded, they will then have to find somewhere to land. Unfortunately for them, Taiwan doesn't really have many good beaches to land on, so it will be a battle for Taiwan's airports and harbors. The Chinese would then face a wall of urban warfare on Taiwan's densely populated western side, while in the east and center, it is covered in mountains. So to summarize, Taiwan, a land of independent people who have been preparing for this scenario for decades, live on a mountainous island with tons of choke points, and would be well aware an invasion is incoming. An incoming invasion that could really go one of three ways. First is a joint firepower strike. This is the least risky of China's military units. It would involve the country getting air superiority and then just bombarding Taiwan until they're basically done. While this is the least risky strategy, Taiwan would need to give in quickly or have this be a lead up to a larger offensive. If this situation were to stretch out over a prolonged period of time, China would face sort of what Putin's Russia is facing right now, with airplane parts and ammunition being used faster than they can be made. Second is a blockade of the island. This would require China to get both air and sea superiority around all of Taiwan, creating much larger supply chains. This strategy would be a big deal for an island that imports most of its electrical resources. So the battles that lead up to either an encirclement or a failed encirclement would be crucial. This barrier could feasibly be held for a short amount of time. But again, if Taiwan doesn't capitulate in that short time frame, China's gonna start eating into its resources, and shortfalls in equipment are going to relieve some of that pressure. The third is the big one, the landing of Chinese troops on Taiwan. This is what Chinese leaders would be eyeing the most, as it has the least likelihood of dragging on and destroying China's reputation. But as mentioned in the geographic section, landing in Taiwan is a risky maneuver, and there is no subtlety that's going to be happening. China would need to be preparing for this months in advance, which, as the Russians found out, is going to be noticed by satellites. China would also need to inconvenience its citizens by using their civilian vessels to get their military over to the island, disrupting some normal activities. A traditional rule of war is that one defending soldier is equivalent to around 3 attacking soldiers. So China and its 2 million troops would need to bring around 3/5 of them to overpower Taiwan's 450,000. If the Liberation Army did gain a foothold on Taiwan, it would then be a grinding battle through Taiwan's narrowly focused infrastructure up the western side. And as we saw on public opinion of Taiwanese, the Chinese are not going to be greeted with a warm welcome. So, to close, hello and welcome to the general area of China, locked in an ideological battle since the Civil War started almost 100 years ago. The People's Republic of China and the Republic of China have been main rivals ever since. The much more powerful communist China in Beijing has long had a dream of unifying all of China. But there's a bunch of pesky people in their way, like pro-democracy protesters on the mainland, or Portugal and the United Kingdom in Macau and Hong Kong, or the Kuomintang in Taiwan. Although a lot has changed over the last few decades, those pro-democracy protesters got crushed out of existence in Tiananmen Square. Macau and Hong Kong are now under Chinese sovereignty. And especially in Hong Kong, the dismantling of democracy is progressing, albeit in a bit of a dramatic way. But there is one place that's still not in Beijing's grasp, And in fact, it's so democratic that the Kuomintang is in the opposition. Yet if you've seen elections in mainland China, you'll know that the Communist Party doesn't do being in the opposition. So, in order for these two to fully reunite, someone's gonna have to lose. And in the current situation, it doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon. The Chinas. Due to internal and external factors, the People's Republic of China at the current time is in no place to invade its breakaway province. And if/when it ever is, it's going to be a risky maneuver to get its lost territory back. If you enjoyed this video and or found it informative, please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. Reject reunification with the mainland as China encroaches on democratic Hong Kong. Oh my god.